Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. I'm Doc Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you are at the intersection. The interesting thing about intersections is that we all go through many intersections daily. The way we navigate these determines the trajectory of our days and of our lives. Fascinating topic today, Terry, creating the conditions.
Yeah, creating the conditions. When we think about our life, basically our life is a creation of the conditions that we've created for that life, whether we are, I have consciously thought about it or subconsciously thought about it. And everything we do, we really create the conditions for whatever result that we derive.
And that ties us right back into a topic we talk about all the time, which is focus on the process.
That's it. That's it, whether it's internal or external, right? Yeah, we're going to create the conditions. And I've once heard you say, and I'd read it before, and it says there's a saying that goes, if all the fish in the water die, then you don't examine the fish, you examine the ecology of what's happening around it, what the conditions around it that cause the death of the fish, which is so profound.
It is. I got that from some of the Racial Equity Institute work that I did over the years. And, you know, it's the groundwater concept, right? And ultimately, sometimes you have to even examine the water in the ground, not just what's in the lake.
Right.
So it's deeper. It's a peel back process to understand, you know, what really are the conditions, what's really causing those conditions to be the way they are. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a tough journey because, you know, we do lots of things as individuals to protect ourselves from our past.
There's so many institutions today that could probably reflect on the conditions that have been created given the product that they are producing today. Let's look at the educational system, more specifically, New Hanover County. You know, as I look around and I question, so what's really happening? What are they really learning, right? I'm like, wow. You know, I'm amazed at the masses of students that don't know certain information. And it's all a result of the conditions that have been created in the schools for the difficult learning. I remember, and I was telling some friends this the other day, when I was in school, and probably when you were in school too, we had books. We took our books home. And we did homework. And so that was an extension of what we were doing at school. So we learned more. Today, I understand that a lot of them don't have the books. They got the e-books. And there's not a lot of homework that's given. And so that additional time at home of learning and studying to perfect your craft, that being a student, is just not happening. And as a result, when I pull into some of these fast food restaurants, and I give them change and they can't count the change back, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You know, my kids actually ended up doing a lot of homework. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it kind of eases off by the end of that senior year, which sounds familiar to me. But they actually do a lot. Now, a lot of it is online. I think a lot of times the issue is that how possible is that for every student, right?
Gotcha.
And so even though now I think, you know, at the high school level, there is a computer for every person, and there is an opportunity, I think, for those people for all of the students to use that in the schools. Mm-hmm. At home, it's not, you know, online access is not ubiquitous, and so there is an issue there. Now, I like it from the creating the conditions standpoint. This discussion is a good one. I've been asked to be part of a community task force to look at some of the things that, you know, in our schools, and it hasn't started yet. I'm very excited about it. My starting point for it in my mind is that it's another groundwater analogy, right? Mm-hmm. So, and maybe the school is like the lake. but our community is like the groundwater. And so we're going to have to answer some pretty tough questions, I think. It gets easy for us on the outside, especially those of us maybe who have students in the system right now who may have problems with the way certain things are. It gets easy to make the schools a focal point, but I think the educational process is deeper. I mean, it definitely goes into policy, and that and is local and statewide, and those are tough questions. Can things in the school system be better? Can those conditions be better? Well, sure. Then it gets to be, well, how do we make them better? And that goes a lot deeper than just the schools.
I would agree. And as you go into the community, I'm going to go a step further. We have a tendency to call everything the system. What we really have to examine is the people who make up the system. What are their philosophies around education or whatever it is that we're dealing with, right? And so we have to look at the makeup of the system, because all systems are made up of people. And they come to the table with certain mental models around whatever education is supposed to look like or whatever legislation is supposed to look like. And so you get these masses of people that create this system, and they come to some type of agreement as a system, but most importantly is the people who make up the system is who we have to kind of try to influence.
And I've always been kind of a student of education, because not only did I do a lot of education, but my formal training was in education. My undergraduate degree, my first career was as a teacher. And then throughout my entire career as a physician, it was teaching graduate level students at that point, right? Because it was medical students who already had undergraduate degrees, or it was young doctors who were doing their residency training. So my background has been pretty heavily in education, and I'm amazed that people think they know as much as they do, right? And, like everybody just doesn't do the necessary prep work to understand how that education has to run. Like, it's a whole profession in and of itself, right? It comes with all the research behind how you most effectively teach things and so forth. And it's kind of like, you can find an all-pro quarterback on every street corner Monday morning. Right?
That's right. That's right.
And we got
That's
Monday
right.
morning quarterbacks around this. It becomes a political flashpoint. And when things become about the politics, then we're kind of in trouble. When you are willing to sacrifice best ways of doing things, you're willing to sacrifice best practices for political gain, we're going to struggle. That's not a condition. Talk about creating conditions. We have created that condition where people can, in our case, in many cases, use that elected school board position as an ideological hammer. And then, we end up in a really tough spot.
Yeah, it's interesting because we like to talk about doing what's in the greater good, right? And oftentimes the greater good for the individual on that board is to do what's best for them and their constituents, right? And it may not be for the greater good of the children and the school system. And that's the tough piece, right? Because they think that what they're doing is right in their eyes, but it may not necessarily be the case. I'm not an educator, and as it relates to having been in the system and educated, I've taught at the university level, but to teach in the K through 12 kind of system, I would imagine it's difficult. And we all know that teachers are not paid. They're not paid handsomely. I've always thought that teachers teach the future leaders of the country, and as a result, they should be compensated very well, given what they do. However, for whatever reason, there's not a value that's placed on teachers in the system. And so when we look at education, oftentimes in my observation, those who go into education really want to help someone. And oftentimes their parents have been educators at the same time. And so, they want to follow mom or dad because they saw them making some great contributions and really helping human beings. But as times have changed and many more distractions have come into the classroom, and again, it starts at home. Some of the lack of discipline that is happening, right, at home, it's just, I would imagine that it's very, very, very difficult. It can become difficult.
Yeah, especially when we're emerging from, but certainly not recovered from the pandemic.
Yes,
and that created so many changes that we're gonna have to continue to do the investigations of what all those changes meant for some time. I mean, they were profound, and at the end of the day, it is going to require some tough discussions. A lot of things are going to seemingly be in conflict, and that's probably good. Because a lot of times things that seem opposed are actually both necessary. And so you have to figure out this dynamic balance, right? Like, how does the energy and the emphasis, move between those two different features, both of which are important, and we're not good at that. The human condition is to seek stability, and so what you end up with then is polar opposite ideological groups that want it to be one way or the other, when in fact it needs to be in equilibrium. And we really struggle with that in just about everything.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I do agree with you. I have a tendency to look at everything from the eyes of a business person, right? It's like a buddy of mine. He said, "Man, everything I see through the world of music." And for me, I see everything through the world of business, meaning, okay, at the end of the 12th year, we know what we want. Right, we know what we should have. We should have a student who can read, write, and do arithmetic at a particular level, right, of competency, right? That's what we should. So let's start building a description of what that should look like, right? That's how I see it. Some people say, well, that's like making widgets. Yes, it is. But we know at the end of 12 years, this student should be able to do this. Some students are going to be able to do it more, and so they'll be able to go into the university. Some will be able to go into a trade. Some will go into military, right? But we're going to develop them so there's a baseline of skills when they leave. So 1 year builds upon another. You go from year 1 to 2. There's another set of skill sets. The year 3, the year 4, the grade 5 and 6. And so every year you're adding more to the foundation that was gained 1. So now you're at 12. And here's what you should be able to do. We should be able to describe that to a T of what should be had. However, again, they look at that as a product. At least I see it as a product, and it is, because we are products, right? But people don't like to utilize that kind of language.
And it's tricky because there are lots of different pathways to get to what you're really talking about is a level of minimal competence, and a lot of people are going to way exceed that. And so there got to be pathways to meet those needs as well, because the greater good of society needs that as well. And so there are lots of different pathways, and then the other thing that we have to grapple with, which has always been tricky in my mind, is it's pretty close to an outcome focus when you talk about what you're trying to get. And we know how perilous that can be because we talk about it all the time, right? There's a process along the way. So, you begin to think, would a sophisticated system begin to provide opportunities for people along the way that actually diverged a little bit from maybe that finite set of conditions that we started out with, because it turns out that they have particular skills suited to a different thing. And now that would be a really cool system in my way of thinking.
I agree. I was having that conversation. A buddy of mine from college called, and we were talking because he's in the educational field, more along the lines of charter schools. And so we were talking around somewhere around the 7th or the 8th grade, if we identify someone that said, hey, this guy's a great artist. This guy right here, he really likes to work with his hands, right? This person is a great graphic artist, right? So let's send them along that path or give them the necessary tools so they can develop that interest that they have. And they may not end up going to college after 4 years, but heck, by the 10th or the 11th or 12th grade, this guy's a great graphic artist, so guess what? We might give him the tools to start his own business as a graphic artist or do an apprenticeship under somebody else who has at a graphic artist kind of business. And so I believe in all those pathways, and I believe in that whole mix of, creativity that goes along with it, because we have some very, very creative people out there, but they're not identified. And so we kind of keep them in this box when in fact, and they wash out of the system because we've never identified what their interests were. And so I truly believe that for those who have those skills, who don't necessarily want to go to college, and we see all this creativity, we need to be able to nurture that as well.
And I think we see it in a lot of manifestations. Many different groups of kids don't fit the ideal paradigm that you're talking about, right? Because some of them will be bored. Some of them, don't have X level of aptitude for this, but they've got X plus in this other area. The kids you were just talking about it, and on and on and on like that. So then we run into the issue of resources and how do you make something like that viable that provides all these different opportunities on scale is harder, but perhaps not impossible. But I do think it really comes down, still at the end of the day, we have to understand what it takes to create the conditions for more people's success and satisfaction with the process, because rare is it that I hear of teachers that are satisfied, administrators that are satisfied, students that are satisfied, community members that are, it's like everybody's dissatisfied, but we're stuck. That's a real interesting formula.
And maybe it should start by asking the question, what would it take for us to create the educational system in our county that produces the optimum student, right? So how do we create those conditions where all of the dissatisfied have a voice to add into and to understand that it's going to be an amalgamation of all of the thoughts to create the best, not if my thought is not accepted, I'm gonna take my basketball and go home. Right? We can't have that, right? It's got to be, again, we talk about the greater good. If we could come to that type of agreement where we understand that, hey, we're doing this for the greater good of the student, and so we want to create this, and that means even having the voice of the student as a part of this whole, how do we create this system that creates the optimal graduate, that they can go whatever track it is that they choose, they can take that track because they were given somewhat of the opportunity. Now, I think that also takes a partnership with the community as it relates to different businesses who understand that what's trying to happen, what we're trying to accomplish by creating the conditions. That means that, some of the high school students get a chance to do some internships and work within their interest. And so it becomes a true partnership at that time.
Yeah, and I know there's some good programs out there with the county schools and different businesses for sure. I don't know what the scale is as much, but, you know, it kind of reminds me, one of the things that when I was in my general surgery residency, one of the goals of the program director at that time that brought me into it said, you know, at the end of this residency, we want you to be total potential surgeons. And that's kind of a medicalization of a word that basically means, you know, you can become anything at the end of this in the realm of surgery, right? Like you can be fully competent to be a general surgeon in any community across the country. You can be fully competent to take on training in multiple different disciplines. Maybe it's plastic surgery. In my case, it was vascular surgery, cardiac surgery, all the different subspecialties, you know. So it really enabled you to have a wide path of possibility. And, you know, when you think about the fact that we've kind of gone beyond the knowledge age into a different age, you know, we can argue about what currently this is the age of what.
Yeah.
But that's really what we need, right? We need people that have this foundational set of skills that is then translatable into everything. And, you know, COVID really brought that to the forefront because the value of adaptability in the workforce is critical when you had these massive shifts in the workforce, and so you end up way short, or, you know, you had to have people whose skills could translate into pretty rapid training to then fill these positions. We didn't quite have it in the optimal state, but we got by, obviously. But it could be a lesson to us that, yeah, you know, we need to create people foundationally in the image of flexibility.
Yep, I would agree. Just understanding the fundamentals, right? So the first condition is to understand the fundamentals so that when you understand the fundamentals, then you can branch off into all the other areas. Because that's basically what you're saying. Hey, you're going to have these fundamental skills as a surgeon to, when you come out, you'll be able to do this in general surgery. But if you want to specialize, then you'll have the skill set to do that too. And that only comes from understanding, you know, the fundamentals. If you don't understand the fundamentals, you definitely can't get to the expertise.
And, you know, the truth of it is that that process actually gets easier the farther out a given spectrum that you are. You know, when you're talking about, okay, in its most general terms, at the level of when somebody finishes the 12th grade, what would that look like? It's actually harder than to figure out what it should look like for somebody who's maybe finishing surgery training, because they've already selected several paths along the way that have taken them to a more finite, you know, set of possibilities. So it is hard. I mean, I think it's easy to be critical, but what we're really talking about is having the conversations at a deep enough level to make some meaningful change, because it's definitely time.
Yep. And it's an iterative process, right? You have the conversation, you come up with a solution, and guess what? 6 months from now, the solution may look different. And guess what you do? You iterate to what that looks like, right? And you have to keep measuring and monitoring what that looks like. So it's not written in stone, but just to have the conversation is good. And to have, as human beings, we're going to get emotional, right? And so there are going to be some people, some triggers that's going to set some people off when you're creating these conditions, right? Because all these conditions, everybody may not necessarily agree with individually, but we have to go from what it means to us individually to the collective, right? Because it's about the collective that's the greater good.
Well, we put so many rules in for ourselves, right? And unknowingly. And, you know, it sounds something like, I can't believe this system is like this. It is set to work against me. And the flip side of that is that in order for me to be satisfied, it needs to be like this. So I'm going to do everything I can to sabotage what's there and make it be the way that will allow me to be in my comfort zone. And we all do that.
Right.
You know, it's a human tendency. It has to do with a lot of things that have happened in our lives all along the way, have put us into into states where we have all these triggers, and if we're not careful, somebody trips that trigger, and we have launched into all these things that have to be a certain way in order for us to be satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a myth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because it can't, we can't have a world customized to all the different lives that are on this planet.
That's right.
But at the same time, at any given moment, if you're alive, you're okay.
That's right.
And we
That's
have to
right.
we have to figure out sort of that. Again, it's another dynamic balance. It's an equilibrium, a dance, if you will, that says, okay, things are okay just like they are right now. What am I really looking at?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's probably not what I think on first pass,
Mm-hmm.
And give it a little bit of space to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also the tool for navigating difficult conversations, is that it's usually not the way if you find yourself offended right out of the gate, that's a good time to take a pause and figure out if you took it the right way. And just that one small act fundamentally changes a lot of things. It gives a person a chance to say what maybe they said differently. It gives you a chance to think about it differently. And maybe more importantly, it gives both parties the chance to understand the other one's reality and have their reality be affected by the other person's reality. And when those things happen, magic is in the air. We can really get some things done.
I agree. But you're asking for a lot of logic. you're asking the people to have a lot of logic.
Chug
right?
off your, put on the brakes for just a second.
Yes.
It's really hard, and we live in a world where we're not set up for that.
That's
All the rapid stimuli that we have, social media and everything, is one source of it, but the fast news cycle, all these different things set us up to not be able to do that. But just because the conditions favor a certain way doesn't mean we can't create conditions that are different. We create that for ourselves in different ways.
That's right.
It kind of starts with a commitment and goes to practices, and it goes to feedback and willingness to accept feedback,
Yeah.
accountability partners,
Yes. Yes.
and all those things. So there really isn't an excuse to not take the time to have the greater good in mind, to have the difficult conversations, to allow your reality to be, reciprocally affected by everyone else's. We don't get a free pass on that.
The dance of change, right? I remember the first time I ever went to a school board meeting. I was like, wow, is this what happens here? All the emotion versus the logic, right? At some point in time, we have to have more logic, right? Not just the educational system, and I don't want to beat up on it. I'm a product of the New Hanover County educational system. I just want to see it a little bit better. I want to see, the product be a little better, and because I hear all the stories, right? But this whole process of creating conditions applies in our lives. We do a lot of this in the corporate setting around creating conditions. We call it culture, right? Even in the family, it's culture, right? But any and everything we do, we should first want to be able to create the conditions for what it is. Now, in what we're trying to achieve, will we achieve it 100% of the time? No. Will we be able to create the perfect conditions every time to achieve what we want to achieve? No. However, when you start talking about creating conditions, you're also really talking about thinking strategically.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what it is.
You can make a very strong case that leadership is only about creating the right conditions.
That's right.
And high-level leaders really live to that for the most part.
Yep.
You know, and the larger the organization, the truer that is, because you get into the whole question of who really has the expertise, and it's never the leader. And you know, it goes back to Steve Jobs. We don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do, and on and on. And the most gifted leaders always create those conditions so that the people in the organization can perform at a high level. And, you know, you see them in athletics, and they're the people that have multiple championships or that have programs that are always in the discussion of who might win the whole thing this year, right?
Right.
That is leadership that's creating a condition. It is a culture that persists, and a lot of times it outlives the person.
Yep.
You know, we've seen it happen just last year in college basketball. You saw Krzyzewski's thing outlive him. When John Shire had the season they did, was it a championship season? No. Were they successful? Well, I think absolutely. You know, and the same thing you saw in all kinds of programs across athletics, and you see it in business as well. I mean, we had a guest, Gary Ridge, who you know, that culture has succeeded him now. You know, and it persists, and so we know that it's possible. And when you create the right conditions, you set the stage for what's called emergence.
Yes.
And that's really when the magic happens, because that concept of emergence is when the right answers just come up out of the group. It's almost as if, you know, there's a mystical force that's pulling the right solutions, the right business solutions, the right sports solutions, whatever they are, out of the group, because you see everybody, or at least a big chunk of the people involved, understand that their opinion is important, and understand that they need to have it out there, and understand that it won't work by itself in isolation. It's going to have some modification from the other folks. And so you've created that concept of interdependence, and that is exponential growth.
Yes, it is. And I'm going to go directly to what I think is a great example, and that's the present NBA playoffs. We look at the 4 teams, right? We can talk about the GOAT, you know, and that whole conversation of who is the GOAT. But if we take a look at the 4 teams, we look at Boston, Miami, Denver, and Los Angeles. You look at Los Angeles, and they got a couple superstars. Everybody knows who they are, right? You go to Denver, maybe one superstar there, right? You go to Miami, one superstar there. You go to Boston, and they got about 3 or 4 superstars. But if we look at who's winning the series, it's the teams with maybe one superstar. But it's obvious that there's a condition that's been created amongst Miami and Denver that allows them to have the chemistry such that there are no real MVPs on the team, but they're clearly outshining those teams with the MVPs and the stars. So there's more chemistry, which means the conditions have been created in such a way where it's really about the we versus the couple of eyes that might happen on a couple of the other teams. Because as I didn't know anybody other than Djokovic on Denver. I didn't know any of the other players. Miami, I can only think about Jimmy Butler, maybe Adebayo. But other than that, I couldn't think of anybody else on the team, right? But they've been blowing out the superstars, right? That some of these guys who could be potentially be the face of the league, they've been getting crushed by these, right? So it's obvious within those organizations, the right conditions have been created around what we do as a team. And everybody knows their role and their responsibility and understand when they have to step up to do or when they have to pull back and follow.
None of us are as good as all of us,
That's
right? And there's a strong theme of that playing out in the season 3 Ted Lasso too. Got to throw in a little Ted Lasso reference because it's
great.
It's coming to a conclusion here in the next couple of weeks. But that concept is so powerful that, you know, again, it's an appreciation of what everyone brings in a way that allows them to bring it at a high level consistently. And that applies to business, that applies to sports, it applies to education, it applies to basically every sector. You know, it's and it comes down to that fundamental of each of us allowing our truth to be affected by the truth of others.
Yes.
Because there's not one truth.
That's right.
You know, we've all experienced things from different perspectives, and they're valid for what they are, because that has been true in this lane, and true in this lane, and true in this lane. And so at the end of the day, when we do things together, we just have to appreciate the richness that brings.
Yep, absolutely. And there is a richness given all of our experiences, right? And the respect of, you know. And again, I go back to mental model, right? What do I have to get rid of, right? And then what do I have to construct in order to create the condition that I'd like to be able to? So ultimately, the work begins internally around the conditions, because not only am I thinking about what's the best for me, but I got to think about what's best for everyone, right? And so that takes a lot of work.
Well, you get at a point there that it's the concept of letting go. And, you know, I think that's a difficult one to grapple with. We have to all grapple with that on a regular basis, because not letting go kind of has two components. You know, one component is holding on to it because we like it, and the other component is kind of, you know, holding on to it and quarantining it off because it was an unpleasant experience. And we tend to make a hierarchy out of that, and we say, well, it's okay to do that if it was really a good experience, and maybe I should let it go if it was a bad experience. I think the more you do the work, you realize that both have to be released, and that allows you, only when you can do that can you be present. And it's really just being present with other people that enables good solution making, that enables you to then co-create the conditions that you need for what comes next, whatever that is.
You know, sometimes people hold on to not so good things because there's a value in that not so good thing to them to hold on to it, right? And we have to examine that. You know, you keep seeing the situation. So why are they holding on? What value is that giving them, you know, of holding on to something that wasn't so good, you know, versus letting it go. And then if they let it go, then there's no value. They don't feel a sense of value. And now they're into an area of the unknown that's unfamiliar to them. And it creates that whole thing called fear.
That's right. And fear drives a ton of this, right? But I think there's almost a uniform reason why people don't let go, even to whether it's to the good things or to the bad things, if we want to define them that way, which is arbitrary, but we'll just for the sake of the discussion. What it really means is that if I hold it to be this, and I'm saying that the conditions are not that right now, what that means is that I don't have to change.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
I don't have. Hey, it ain't me.
That's right. That's right.
The things are stacked against me, or
That's right.
you know, this condition isn't what that is, and I know it's, you know, it can be greatness. I've had greatness. I mean, you know, this ain't it, so it's not me.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a pitfall right there, because it always starts with that self-work. It always starts with interrogating, is the way I'm thinking about this, in other words, my mental model at this time,
Right.
does it fit this situation?
Right. That sounds like me. That it ain't me. It sounds like me with golf, right? It's not me. It's got to be the golf club. So I need to go get a new set of clubs.
That's right.
Every 12 months because it's not me.
Exactly, exactly. And and that's the hard work, right? And
right.
At its essence, that's the work we all have to do all the time. And leaders have to not only do it, they have to create conditions that allow folks that they're leading to do that same work. And that's why things like a safe environment is so important, because if you don't have a safe environment, there's no way that you can make yourself vulnerable enough to do that work.
That's right.
And higher levels of that work are in front of other people.
That's right.
Right? That's when the team gets really good, is when there's that level of vulnerability amongst the team that enables somebody to say the trouble they're having, knowing that not only is the team going to accept that, they're going to help them to the extent they can.
That's right.
And that's when great things happen.
Great things happen in an environment where the most important thing you can say is a question. You can question that given condition at that particular time, and you're very safe in questioning that condition, because you know that at the end of the day, that question is really about how do we become better? How do we make this different and better for all, versus the answer, right? And I think I heard some time ago, leaders of yesterday, it was about providing the answer, the solution. The leaders of tomorrow, it's really about asking the right question.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite sayings. I use it in the context of being a physician, but it's also really any business leader. The original thought for the doctor is, it's a race to the right answer. And sometimes that actually is still true in certain emergencies and different kind of things like that. But for leadership, it's a quest to exhaust all the right questions, and it seems slow and laborious. And that's how you're getting into the right places, because it ends up having you have to go through the productive discomfort pieces in order to get to what's next that's going to be highly successful. And doubling down on the rose-colored glasses approach, where everything we do is great, is going to impose a ceiling.
Yeah.
And that's not what we don't have to accept any of those ceilings, because potential is limitless if we tap into all the energy and ability that we typically have in a given group.
I would say the first condition that needs to be created is just the condition to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Without the conversation, it doesn't start.
That's one of the things, when I was with Novant Health and when she was with Novant Health, Tanya Blackman was so gifted at doing. And, she created a condition that after you had been in several meetings with her, it was very obvious that not only was your perspective welcomed, it was expected. And that just creates such a more robust dialogue, right? Because it's like safety on steroids. Like, it's saying that, yeah, we want to hear from you. Not only do we want to hear from you, we need to, because at the end of the day, it's going to make our forward progress faster and higher. And, that's a simple technique that can be used, a meeting evaluation, to just ask, was your voice heard today? What did we, what are we doing that we shouldn't do? Or, who's missing? How do we leverage other perspectives? All these things that are kind of, they're cues that say, our condition is one that we need all of you.
That's right. That's right. Because as I look at society today, it seems like we're going in the opposite direction. People don't want to have those conversations, right? They just want to. They want you to follow, right? Buy into whatever the story is, without questioning the story and without giving your voice, and that's not setting the conditions for everybody to thrive.
Well, I know whenever I hear the gospel according to me preached by anybody, I'm always a little skeptical.
That's
But
right.
we are really seeing that all the time. And the way it often plays out is it comes across as righteous indignation, right? And, it's a how dare you, how dare they, how can it possibly be that this group of people is, whatever it is.
Right.
And, it's a tough place to work from.
Very difficult place to work from, and it's can be for those who don't have the right mental or have a particular mental makeup. It can be demoralizing.
Yeah, and we
Right.
see, and it has dramatic implications for governing bodies, right? So when you see these things that are strictly partisan,
Mm-hmm.
there are I'll say it, there are evil forces at play in that point in time, right? Because it's driven by some ideological point. It has nothing to do with what would ultimately be the best solution,
Right.
right? It has to do with posturing and what somebody perceives as needed to be reelected, maybe something like that, because you just don't, in a group as diverse as one of those governing bodies, there are just more opinions than that, right? I mean, that's just a fact. It's like the old thing, get three surgeons together, you're gonna get 6 or 7 different opinions,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right,
because
right, right.
there's more to it, and so until we find ourselves in a better place from things like that, we're going to continue to struggle, because what it means is we're really not having the difficult conversations.
That's right.
And if we're not doing that, we're certainly not getting to the best solutions.
That's right, and we're definitely not establishing the condition for the best solutions, right? Because it only happens through co-creation. It only happens through co-creation, right? Because we're not always going to see things the same, but if we can at least have the condition in place to have the conversation, then the probability of co-creation happening it definitely increases.
And sometimes it's as simple as understanding that co-creation process, that hearing things out process, keeps you from missing important factors. I mean, it's really that simple at its essence. Is you have to get the richest inputs in order to get the best product. It's simple.
Yeah. We need to think about, I would say, prior to going to any meeting, is how do we help establish those conditions so that everybody's voice can be heard, so that we can create the best possible solution as a collective versus as an individual. There are times where, of course, there has to be that leader just saying, hey, here's what we're going to do. So there are times, but for the most part, you can even create the conditions for that to be the case as well. And so we need to, at least in my opinion, from a sociological perspective, we need to go down that path.
Well, the best groups do.
Yeah.
It's plain and simple. And, you said it well, too, that, you don't get this defer decision indefinitely.
Yeah, that's true.
Ultimately, but that's part of creating the condition, right? Part of it is, what's needed for decision, how we're going to make a decision, how long we are going to execute along this decision track before we reevaluate, because as you said earlier, processes need to be iterative. You can't just, launch something into orbit and just let it stay up there forever. Sooner or later, it's going to fall to Earth unless you do the right maintenance and all these kind of things.
That's right. So, I see nothing but benefit from creating the conditions, right? Because it allows for a lot of the analysis to kind of take place prior to the real conversations happening. You know, so when you come to the table with the research, having done the research, actually having had probably some conversations before the conversation, right? And so it can do nothing but make the quality of the decision better and actually expedite as you talk about process.
I mean, I've been constantly amazed in my leadership journey when the conditions have been right, the right answers, the viable path forward always emerges. 100%. It is never not. Doesn't mean that path won't change at some point because nobody's got a true crystal ball, despite the fact that many hold out that they do.
Yeah.
But the truth is, when those conditions are met, the right answer pretty much makes itself.
Yeah, I would agree. As our friend Dr. Rouse says, the universe is our friend, right? So when the right things are in place, guess what happens? The right solutions present themselves, right?
Yep.
Sometimes we just have to have our eyes open to see what that solution actually is.
That's exactly right. Well, I think we've created a pretty good condition today. Appreciate our listeners for hanging out with us. If you want to see more of our work, you can find us at unlikelyintersection.com. You can find us on YouTube at Unlikely Intersections, obviously here. Facebook, Unlikely Intersections. You can catch me at docphilipbrown.com. And Terry, where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Terry Jackson, PhD. Please go to our website. Please go to YouTube, like, share, make comments, make suggestions. We enjoy reading your comments and your suggestions. And if you have suggestions for topics, please feel free. Or you may even think someone who you know may be an interesting guest to be a part of Unlikely Intersections.
We'll see you at the next intersection.